Examine the two links between DSW1 and DSW2. Gigabit 1/0/5 and gigabit 1/0/6. They are independent links within the topology. There is no ether channel bundle between them. Therefore, spanning tree protocol is going to have to block one of the ports on these links to make sure that there is no layer 2 loop. So if we look at DSW1, we'll type in show spanning tree, and let's just focus on VLAN 10 right now. It is the root bridge. All the ports are designated in the forwarding state. If we look at DSW2 and we type in show spanning tree for VLAN 10, we can see that for gigabit 1/0/5, it is the root port in the forwarding state, but 1/0/6 is the alternate port that's in the blocking state. So how was the decision made to block this particular port? Well, if we look here, cost is tied. The cost is 4 for both of these interfaces, 105 and 106. Therefore, the next item in the decision-making process is to look at the upstream bridge ID. Well, the BPDUs are coming from DSW1 inbound on both of these interfaces. Therefore, the bridge ID is going to be the exact same for both BPDUs that arrive. Therefore, it is tied. So the next step in the decision-making process is to look at the upstream port IDs. So as BPDUs arrive from DSW1, one of them is going to have a port ID listed as 28.5, and the other one's going to have a port ID listed as 128.6. So as they arrive inbound, DSW2 looks at these port IDs now for the tiebreaker and says, all right, so the BPDU that arrived in gigs 105 had a port ID of 128.5, and the one that arrived in on 106 has 128.6 as the port ID. As I said, it's based on what DSW1's sending that's listed here on DSW1. So DSW2 says 128.5 is lower, therefore that becomes the root port in the forwarding state, and the other one becomes the alternate port in the blocking state. So with that set up for us now, how can I make gigabit 1/0/6 the root port by modifying DSW2? Well, I can make it the root port by changing the cost. And there's two ways I can change the cost here. I can either give gigabit 1/0/6 a lower cost than gigabit 1/0/5, or I can give gigabit 1/0/5 a higher cost than 1/0/6. Wait a second, that works out to being the exact same thing, doesn't it? So in reality, what we're trying to do is simply give 106 the lower cost no matter what, and it's going to become the root port. So if I go into global configuration mode and enter interface gigabit 1/0/5 configuration mode, if I was to modify this interface right now based on the current configuration, since the cost is 4, I have to give it a higher cost. So let's type in here spanning tree for VLAN 10, and we'll give it a cost value. Wow, look at that range. That's a large range of cost values. But here I just have to make sure it's greater than 4. Let's give it a value of 5. And then if we look at the output of do show span for VLAN 10, we can now see that gigabit 1/0/5 has a cost of 5. 1/0/6 still has its cost of 4, and we accomplished our goal. It's a root port, currently in the listening state, but it'll go listening, learning, forwarding. It'll get to the forwarding state, and gigabit 1/0/5 is definitely in the blocking state, as we can see here. There we go. So root port, forwarding state 106. We did that by modifying interface gigabit 1/0/5. Let's remove the command spanning tree VLAN 10 cost 5. So let's remove that cost value. Let's make sure the change takes effect. All right, so the cost is 4 in both cases, and 105 is now the root port again. Let's go to gigabit 1/0/6. So interface gigabit 1/0/6. And now let's change spanning tree VLAN 10 cost. It would have to be lowered in this case because we're modifying 106 and we want it to be the root, so we have to make give it a value lower than 4. So we'll give it a value of 3. And well, you can see we accomplished the exact same goal in this case. So there's a little bit of flexibility here in regards to how you want to configure it. You can either increase the cost on an interface or decrease the cost on an interface and end up with the exact same result. So let's remove these changes we made. Type in show spanning tree for VLAN 10. And we are back to having gig 105 as the root and 106 as the blocked port.